It's Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're in the Inland Empire, and History Nerds Unite because they are back. Two of my favorite people when it comes to our lessons in history about the state of California. Genevieve Preston, she is the archivist for San Bernardino County. Her boss is Bob Dutton. You know him well. He was GOP leader in the California State Senate, but he is now the elected recorder, assessor, clerk of San Bernardino County. And I bring them back because we had such a great time learning about one part of San Bernardino, that was the Silver Rush. Now we're going to learn about the importance of water. Is that right?
Correct.
Why is it, Mr. Dutton, that the recorder, assessor, clerk is here with all these historical documents?
Well, the county clerk is the actual custodian of all records and everything, and the archives department is the one that preserves it for the future and does all the historical preservation. So they really do work hand in hand, along with the recorder, as you'll see.
Right.
Some of the documents we look at, I mean, these were recorded deeds and conditions and restrictions, things like that. They actually created everything, and so it's important that we have the archives in place so that we can have records.
It tells the story.
Tells the story.
Literally, we are going to march through a series of official public documents to help tell the story of the city of Ontario, which we know extremely well, about the Chaffey brothers. We've heard of Chaffey College. It really does give us a picture of how this region developed. And
Brad, I think also
Yeah.
too, I think it's important for people in order to really appreciate what you have today, is to have a better understanding of what actually took place in our history and how we actually got started.
And think about this. Ontario is about to take local control of an international airport.
That's correct.
That would have never happened if two guys named George and William Chaffey did not develop the Ontario model colony in the late 1800s. There would be no Ontario International Airport driving commerce, turning this entire region into a hub that it's become.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about it, Genevieve. I know you love being on television, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about George and William Chaffey. Here's George. Here's his brother, William. Tell me about them.
Well, they came to California because their father had come and settled in Riverside, and they were kind of interested in the land boom that was going on in the 1800s. So there was kind of a perfect storm that occurred in California. Railroad rates went really low.
Right.
There was a lot of cheap or government land, and there was the ability, if you could get water to that land, to develop it and sell it for high profit.
And one of the Chaffey brothers, George, had worked on building ships.
Yes, so he was uniquely qualified to then turn his engineering skills to water management and irrigation. And William was into horticulture and soil.
And one would have not realized, and you can speak to this, Mr. Dutton, that this area actually was a very significant area when it relates to ag. You would have thought it's hot, it's dry, but in the early years,
Well, it had the soil and everything just was very conducive to doing different types of ag products, whether it be the vineyards for wine. Some of the actually some of the best brandies and ports actually came out of this region.
Who knew?
Because of the long growing season, the hot weather, it lended itself to heavy sugar content within the grapes. But also, let's not forget about lemons and oranges and the citrus as well. This area was just ideally suited for it. The only thing it really needed was water.
and that's where the Chaffeys come in. So they approach someone, his last name being Garcia, and they acquired this home.
And
It's the Garcia house.
2,500 acres
Yeah.
of his property
And
as
that's
well.
key. Why was that key?
Because they developed their first colony, which was Etiwanda, and they laid out the whole town and plan. As they were celebrating Thanksgiving dinner with Mr. Garcia, that's when they came out to purchase the property. And so they laid out the whole town of Etiwanda very simply, very straightforward. But what they did was
And
very...
here actually is an example of the plots. I mean, literally, there are these square plots, and this, Mr. Dutton, is in the records of the San Bernardino County office.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, so they also, wait, see, this is why I love this stuff. Here's the deed. This is the deed, right?
The article of incorporation for their water company.
And that's where water comes in. Continue.
Yes. So what was interesting about them is they laid out the water, and because their father had settled in Riverside and there were a lot of issues going on with water and who got how much of the water flow of the Santa Ana, they were very innovative in what they came up with. So they actually came up with a mutual water company where the water was not only delivered by cement pipe, so you didn't have seepage issues or issues that you would have normally in a ditch of evaporation, but that also every landowner got equal shares depending on their acreage, and they were guaranteed that amount of
And
water.
the cement pipe was really the innovation, is that
Yes.
right, sir?
Well, like I said, it cut down on evaporation and loss, due to exposure to the.
And they
the sun.
also developed a small power plant. They brought in a telephone, is that right?
Yes, at the Chaffey Garcia house, George was friends with Edison, and he actually
Just
got,
Edison.
Just Edison.
Just Thomas Edison.
And he got some of the first incandescent lights, and because he had built the water, he also built a small dynamo or small generator that then powered the house. And so they were able to light the first lights in Southern California, and then they also had the first telephone call in Southern
What
California
did that do,
at that house.
sir, Mr. Dutton, that this small outpost called Etiwanda was really kind of a hub for innovation in the, was it 1874, 5, 6?
1882.
82, 3, 4?
Well, it just starts setting the stage. I mean, when we start bringing in infrastructure today, you need to bring in infrastructure in order for the other good things to come about. And this was in the early pioneer days. As a matter of fact, the Chaffey Garcia house, you can actually visit it today.
Right,
So-
which is nice. And based upon their work in Etiwanda, as I understand it, they received commendations from Congress, is that right?
For their next colony that they created, they got their commendation.
It was
for it.
at Ontario?
That was the Ontario
okay, so
model
we're jumping
colony.
ahead, and let's talk about Ontario. I mean, Ontario, it is one of the main cities in this region. What am I looking at?
You're looking at the official map that they recorded of the plan of Ontario, and you can see how it references the Rancho Cucamonga, which is what the land was originally during the Spanish days. It was one of the original land grants.
And doesn't the guy sitting next to us live in Rancho Cucamonga?
He does.
I mean, are you living, sir? Assessor Dutton, are you living on one of the plots? Do you know?
No.
I don't know about that. I haven't seen that map yet, so
But
I don't
No,
think
he's
so.
up and over.
Okay.
I'm up by Chaffey College.
And for our viewers not from this region, one of the key community colleges in our community is Chaffey College, and we'll get there in a second. But where are these plots now? Do you know, Genevieve?
There's the downtown area.
I'm gonna hold this up. Yeah.
So there's the downtown area that's right down here,
Uh-huh.
and that's where we think of Ontario, and the airport would be over here to this side.
Yeah, that would be actually downtown Ontario.
Yeah.
Euclid Avenue, probably.
Yeah.
And they started to market Ontario. I love this brochure. How did you have to get this brochure?
They have it at the Ontario Museum.
See? And so as we continue our conversation, I want to keep talking about how the development of Ontario really caused a boom in this region that allowed it to develop into what it is today. We'll talk about Chaffey College, and we'll talk about how the Chaffey brothers, they went international. Her name is Genevieve Preston. He is Bob Dutton, Assessor in San Bernardino County. We'll be right back on Charter Local Edition. Welcome back to Charter Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here. Another history lesson with Bob Dutton. He is the Assessor Clerk Recorder of San Bernardino County. He brings the Archivist for the county, Genevieve Preston. And we know that the Chaffey brothers, they have decided to launch what's known as the Ontario Model Colony. They had some principles in mind when they were launching that colony. What were they?
To have all the water delivered by cement pipe, and that each owner got an equal share of that based on their acreage. To create a beautiful thoroughfare from one end of the settlement to the other, which they named after their favorite mathematician,
Okay.
Euclid.
Of course.
And then to create an agricultural college to provide information.
And we're going to talk about that college soon.
And to not allow the sale of intoxicating liquors so that they would attract the highest quality of settlers.
Which is interesting, Mr. Dutton, because we've always known San Bernardino County as compared to Riverside County as the Wild West. You know, Riverside County was seen as kind of the county where everyone was demure, and San Bernardino County was the Wild West. And so how did this mesh with that view?
Well, I think basically.
I don't know how to answer that.
I don't know how to
yeah.
answer it either. I can only speculate.
Right.
So.
Well, let's talk more about how they were attracting folks to Ontario. Because, first of all, what does Ontario mean?
Ontario means beautiful waters.
So again, water is really what matters. Everyone's talking about water. This, of course, this is like the marketing building for this.
Their land office where they would sell their property.
And it's funny that Mr. Dutton, before he was in elective office, what did you do?
I was a real estate broker.
A real estate broker. So it just comes around. And this is a beautiful fountain showing some of the groves in this area.
I think it's Euclid Avenue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that Euclid?
It's Euclid, and they planned a fountain so that people would know there was an abundance of water. It was just one of their marketing schemes. So if you see a fountain, you know there's water, you're going to have water for your crops, so there's not going to be an issue.
It was that important. It's so funny because even though we're in drought today, we don't realize that in the 1800s, everything was about, pre-1900, you had to know if there was water.
Well, what the main thing here is that they realized the importance of a good infrastructure to deliver the water. That's what, frankly, California has been lacking here of recent years, is that we haven't really kept up with building the infrastructure necessary to properly manage the water that we do have here on a regular basis. Chaffey brothers actually did it right, because they learned how to manage and distribute the water in a very efficient and friendly manner, and just by putting in the enclosed piping that they used so they could maximize the amount of water that was actually being delivered to where it was needed.
Some of the elected officials in this region, some of the leaders in this region are graduates of Chaffey College. Did you go to Chaffey?
No, but my wife teaches there.
See? Okay, so, it says a lot. And this is the original Chaffey College.
Correct.
Developed in 1890. It's not at this site anymore.
No.
But still, it's wonderful to see what the initial building looked like. First graduating class, am I looking at it right here?
Yes.
Who are they?
They are Helen Dyer and Alma Wilmot. They were the first graduating class from Chaffey in 1890.
Is it relevant that they're women? 1890?
Yes.
I would think. How was the first graduating class two women?
Because they're just the first two.
That's just the way it is.
Yep.
And now we have Mrs. Dutton as a professor at Chaffey College. Like you had said, ag was really the push, the focus. And this, and Mr. Dutton, you can speak to this, citrus, oranges, so critical in these early years. Tell us about what was developed in this region.
Well, the navel orange was actually introduced in 1879.
Okay.
And it was brought here, and the reason it was so significant is because it had a longer growing season.
Got it.
And it actually was considered to be sweeter, and they actually had greater value. But the navel orange actually was developed here in Ontario back in 1879.
So ag was pivotal to the development of Ontario and surrounding areas. The Chaffey brothers, though, were not done. They also launched, was the San Antonio Water Company part of Ontario? What was that for?
That was part of Ontario. So when they laid out Etiwanda, they had water that came with that land from Garcia. When they bought Ontario, they sold 1,400 acres in 8 months of Etiwanda, which gave them enough financial
Okay.
backing to then start Ontario, their model colony, and do really more of what they wanted to do. And so one of the things they did was also lay out a water company, but they had to get water from a different source. So they got it from the San Antonio Creek.
And so this is the incorporation.
And that's the incorporation of the San Antonio Creek. And the money they had behind that for capitalization was $1.5 million in 1883.
Which is a lot of money.
A lot of money in today's bag.
And this is a document that you found in your archives.
Yeah, one of the stocks for the company
And
that
this
people got.
is, I love this. This is the building.
That was their power company that they built in conjunction also with the water company.
What's so remarkable about the Chaffeys is that what they were doing in Ontario drew international attention.
Yes.
And so what happens after Ontario successfully launches?
They are approached by the Australian Water Commission and Irrigation to come to Australia, the area of Victoria, which was desert land, and develop 33,000 acres of land to be watered.
Are these the Chaffeys in Australia?
No, that is the delegation that came
To Ontario
to Ontario
convince
just
them.
to meet George and William to convince them to come.
And they went.
They went.
Where did they go?
They went to Mildura Valley, and they designed a system to irrigate those 33,000 acres. And the pumps are still working today, and you can still go see them. There's a whole Chaffey tour you can take in Mildura.
Now, there were some challenges in Australia.
There was, in 1893, there was a bank collapse that occurred because of a bad wheat crop in Argentina, and the Chaffeys were affected by that in Australia as well.
It just shows we're interconnected today.
Even back
Yes.
then.
We are even interconnected back then. So what happened to the Chaffeys?
Well, William stayed in Australia to try to still make some money, and George came home and took a consulting job for the city of Ontario because we'd had a couple droughts
Okay.
between when they left and when he got back.
And so this is Ontario upon his return.
That's Ontario upon his return, so there's more development, and Euclid Avenue
please,
is still
sir.
laid out.
You can even see the mule cart.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about, which I love, the mule cart. But what is this, Genevieve?
That was actually what George did when he came back. Was he found a new way to tap water. It actually was like digging a tunnel down to the bottom resource, and he was actually able to help Ontario in water conservation and get the water they need without actually having to pipe it in from anywhere else. And so because it became known as a model irrigation colony, 1903 Congress
Yes.
designates it as an act, and they also get asked to submit a model, the San Antonio Water Company, of the irrigation and their alluvial plains that you have in that model of what was going on to the St. Louis Exposition.
And some other folks got involved. Now, this is a name. Is this name known in this county, Charles Frankish? Is that a name that we see on street signs or?
A historic building in Ontario.
Okay, say it. Go. Yeah.
Charles Frankish actually took over for the Chaffeys when they left to go to Australia, and he actually developed some of the areas that were Ontario is probably well known for, like San Antonio Heights.
Right. San Antonio Heights. What is this?
One of the prettiest maps in our collection.
I was going to say.
It's great. He designed it all in those arcs to perfectly use all the space available up there in the
And
foothills.
was it Mr. Frankish that developed the mule cart?
He did. He was one of the proponents of that because down Euclid Avenue they had a trolley system. And so it was a gravity-based one so that the mule would carry them up the hill, but the mule could ride all the way back down. So until it was electrified in
The
1895.
Chaffeys were not done, Mr. Dutton, am I right?
That's right.
They were not done. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how the Chaffeys played a hugely significant role in the development of water for really the entire West. Is that fair? She is Genevieve Preston. He is Bob Dutton. We'll be right back on Charter Local Edition. Welcome back. It's Charter Local Edition. We are learning about the history of portions of San Bernardino County, specifically Ontario. But we're going to go a little farther east, actually, as we speak with Bob Dutton, Assessor Clerk Recorder of San Bernardino County, Genevieve Preston. She is the Archivist. So the Chaffey brothers develop Ontario. Ontario's doing well. One of the Chaffeys move on. Where does he go?
He goes to Australia, and they found the Mildura irrigation colony.
But one comes back and starts working on a Colorado River project. Is that right?
Correct.
Why, Mr. Dutton?
Yeah, that was George, and basically what was happening, Congress passed the Desert Land Act, and that was in 1877.
Okay.
And the purpose of that was to help create, to encourage settlement of the West. And so in order to make that, to achieve that, obviously you
Right.
need to have a certain amount of infrastructure. The railroad was important to come through the area, but also too, the development of the proper infrastructure for delivery of water. And so George, he joined the California Development Company.
With this gentleman, who's he?
Rookwood.
Charles Rookwood. He was an engineer with the U.S. Reclamation Service. They formed the California Development Company. Well, what was the importance of that?
Well, it was actually going to help encourage the land ownership for the people of the United States as they would come forward. And there was one thing that was unique about it is that most of the Homestead Act acquisitions were smaller pieces. This was 640 acres,
Nice.
an entire section of land, and so that was very encouraging for people that were coming from the east, looking for opportunity to become more prosperous.
640 acres, not bad.
Not
but
bad.
they needed water.
They needed water.
And so let's talk about what was happening in the Imperial Valley.
So when George gets hired on by Rookwood to come in and develop, they were trying to develop how to get the water to the land because unlike Ontario and Etiwanda, which George and William had created a land company where you got set amounts of water, the California Development Company was just there to give the water and get paid for the water. So they weren't developing the land at that time when George initially gets hired on.
And
So,
so
it was
there's-
all desert.
Right, and this is an example, right, Genevieve?
Of what it looked like beforehand.
Yeah, not so much.
Not so
A little
much.
dry, right, Mr. Dutton?
A little bit dry.
Yeah, and so, but they start to build.
So they start to build. So George builds a head gate at the Colorado River at Pilot Knob,
Which is where?
which is right on the border of kind of San Diego and Mexico.
Okay.
Actually.
Okay.
So he designs this, and that was actually part of the problem George came into is that his head gate, when he was building it, he wanted to build, that one. He wanted to build 3 head gates to control the water and the water flow because they were utilizing the areas where the Colorado River overflowed naturally in wet years
Okay.
as their irrigation channels because it was already built halfway by nature to get the water in there. So, but when he goes into Mexico to help develop the water to get to the valley, he encountered some problems and he had to actually agree to help colonize the area as well.
And is that Calexico and Mexicali?
That's Calexico and Mexicali, and that's when they rename it the Imperial Valley because the desert or the Salton Sink didn't have quite the ring to get
Right.
people to come.
Here's Calexico.
Yeah.
So we talk about it all coming around. I married up, and my wife's grandfather started movie theaters in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and one of his movie theaters to this day is in Calexico.
That's cool.
You know, so it's kind of cool. And he came from the east, from I think it was like West Virginia and then Iowa. So talk about the Salton Sink because that is something we still are dealing with today.
Yes. Known today as the Salton Sea.
Right.
It
wasn't supposed to be the Salton Sink.
It wasn't supposed to be the Salton Sea. It was a Salton Sink, and it wasn't. It was more of a dry bed.
Is this it?
That was it. They harvested salt there.
Right. Okay. And what happened?
Well, as Mother Nature it was actually an
Yeah.
El Nino situation occurred back in those early days,
Right.
and it basically overpowered the system that was in place.
That's one way to say it.
Over a period of time.
Massive flooding.
Massive flooding. And, basically the levees gave way and it lent itself towards the water going to its, lowest point, and that just happened to be the Salton Sink.
And so now what we have in the Salton Sink is the Salton Sea.
The Salton Sea.
Although the Salton Sea is drying up.
Well, and that's understandable. By natural occurrences, it will dry up eventually.
Right. Now, at the same time, Mr. Chaffey is asked to develop, like you said, a city for the use of this water?
For the use of the water to colonize the area. That was part of the thing, so that they create the Imperial Valley.
And this is the city?
No.
This is, what is this? Tell me.
That's Manzanar. So
Okay.
George got in a fight.
Manzanar, we know that name. Go.
Yeah. George got in a fight with Rookwood because he wouldn't show him the books, and they kept getting sued because they weren't getting water there. So he left after only 22 months.
And
so when the Salton Sea was becoming the Salton Sea during the El Nino year in 1905, George had already moved on to the Owens Valley. And
thank you.
yeah.
And keep going.
And so he moved on to the Owens Valley, and he actually was developing the town, and he called it Manzanar because they planted apple orchards out there
And this is Manzanar.
before he developed and irrigated it.
Okay. Now, Manzanar becomes relevant in the 1940s. We'll get there. Is this also Manzanar?
That's Manzanar after he developed it with the farms and the orchards.
But he got caught up with.
Well, the same year he bought the land in Manzanar was the same year that Mulholland actually started buying water rights to create the aqueduct to feed the city of Los Angeles.
Tell us about that, Mr. Dutton.
Well,
Here's the Owens Valley.
That's before it got
Yeah.
sucked dry.
So what happened with Mr. Mulholland?
It didn't fare very well.
Yeah, tell us.
I don't know how easy. I don't know how.
Mr. Mulholland was able to buy up.
All the water rights in the Owens Valley, which basically made it back to the desert that we saw in the first picture of it. So
And LA became LA because
and
of
LA
it.
became LA because they had enough water resources in that 230-mile aqueduct
Yeah.
to feed
And
the
this
city.
is part of the aqueduct.
Yes.
But tell me about Manzanar, because Manzanar becomes part of the tragic history of the 1940s.
It becomes a Japanese internment camp, actually, because it was considered separated from Los Angeles, and so that they could inter the Japanese citizens there, and so they actually put them there. And actually, the Mulholland fought to not have it there because he didn't want to have to give any water back to the valley. And so they had to give some waters, but the only apple trees left are by the Manzanar
The
internment
irony.
camp. Yeah.
And this is the Chaffey family.
Yes.
When?
In about 1912, when he'd moved to Whittier, because he moves out of the Owens Valley in Manzanar
Because
he didn't have enough water and it was no longer a town.
Mr. Mulholland was
Yeah.
successful.
Yes, but then George, when he moves to Whittier, he develops the La Habra Valley Water District and starts making sure everybody in East Whittier gets enough water and increase property
What do
values
you make of all this,
significantly.
Mr. Dutton? What do you make of all this?
I just think you had a lot of creative people going on back in the 1900s.
It
early
really is
1900s.
remarkable. It is remarkable, but for the efforts of the Chaffeys, we just wouldn't be here today. And I know that you were part of a huge celebration when Ontario Airport was returned to local control.
Absolutely.
That would not have happened but for George and Michael Chaffey.
And the Chaffey brothers were truly visionaries,
Right.
and they were builders and developers, and they wanted to create, like they said, the model colony. They were looking to create
And now
something
we're creating
as an example of what we should do, and I think that's one of the significant things about San Bernardino County, and particularly this region, because we really did set the stage for a lot of things that got developed and happened here later on. I mean, when you take a look at the first light bulb on the West Coast, the first telephone, we actually were doing hydroelectric power due to the water systems that were being put in. I mean, we really, when you take a look at the history of this area, we really contributed a lot to what's going on.
He is Bob Dutton, Assessor Clerk Recorder of San Bernardino County. She is Genevieve Preston. She is the Archivist. My name is Brad Pomerance. Hope you enjoyed us on Charter Local Edition.